It is a simple and joyous task, singing the songs of one's faith and culture. In this synagogue on the Virginia Peninsula, it is also, for many, an extraordinary testament to freedom. The Jewish community on the Virginia Peninsula is nestled between the waters of the James and York Rivers and lies between the cities of Richmond and Norfolk. This area is home to a small group of people who can provide first-hand testimony to the Nazi Holocaust of the Jews. That memory is not just embedded in their minds. A small display in the city's War Memorial Museum opens the door to painful occurrences, and an on-site monument is a reminder of how extraordinary it is to have the freedom to simply sing.
In 1945, the voices of Jews in Europe were certainly not full of song. In April of that year, General Dwight Eisenhower heard only the moans and cries and final breaths of Jews in his first look at a German concentration camp. Upon seeing the carnage, Eisenhower made what he would later say was one of the most important decisions in his career as a five-star general and two-term president of the United States. In a letter to General George Marshall, Eisenhower wrote, "The visual evidence and verbal testimony of starvation and cruelty were overpowering. I made the visit deliberately in order to be in position to give first-hand evidence of these things if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." Eisenhower declared that every soldier under his direct command must bear witness to the atrocities on display at every concentration camp they encounter. Eisenhower knew, as we do now, that history must never forget the Nazi Holocaust of the Jews. Now, as this generation of survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust begins to pass on and the years fade away, there is an overwhelming feeling in the worldwide Jewish community and among humanists and historians alike that the memories, unlike the years, must never fade away.
The Nazi Holocaust of the Jews didn't just happen overnight. It evolved from one event to another, from one government policy toward the Jews to another, from one standard of bigotry to another. These women all lived rather free lives as children growing up in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. There was anti-Semitism, to be sure, but there was little hint of things to come, even after a brash young fascist named Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933.
I had a very normal childhood as a young girl. I was born in 1924, and I lived in a very Gentile neighborhood because my parents' business was there. At the time that I lived in Hamburg, the economics weren't too good, so we had to go where we could probably do the best business, and my parents were in food business. Across the street from us was a whole street full of people that lived for the that worked for the government at the railroad, and they were very prestigious jobs. So they had a big income, and they were wonderful people, you know, to do business with. So. And also, all my friends were, all the children from them, they were my friends, and we were brought out. We played soccer together with the boys and the girls with the dolls and everything. The first thing that, of course, he did is he forbade all the people that worked for the government to buy Jewish food from Jewish people, or even be with them or be friendly with them. And with that, of course, business went completely down, and my parents my mother actually, because my father was already in the hospital at that time. My mother had to kind of close the store and move into another neighborhood, and of course I lost all my friends.
Ethel's father was a World War I veteran. He proudly fought for Germany and suffered a severe head wound that would, 8 years later, result in his death. Those facts created a false sense of security in Ethel's family.
And the reason we didn't go, because my mother always thought, well, my father died for the fatherland, and they would certainly not do anything for us.
The same thought held true for Lottie Goldstein, whose parents sent her to New York in 1936, fearful of a frightening trend that was taking place.
Nobody could believe it. I mean, we couldn't believe it. We had good Germans. Our forefathers were German. I went back generations. We lived in Germany. So how could anybody? My father worked for the government during the First World War. How could anybody say we are not German and we are not good Germans? No. However, we had Rassenkunde in school, which was race lessons in school. And you know, Hitler said the Aryan looked blonde, blue-eyed. I had brown eyes, but I was blonde and very nice looking. I was a typical German girl. However, after I was 14 years old, I could not go back to school. I went finally to it's called Handelsschule. It's a business school, which we paid for. And I stayed for 2 years there. And after that, I just stayed home. Nobody would talk to me. All my friends could not talk to me. The people I grew up with, I grew up in a predominantly Catholic town. Even the nuns couldn't talk to me. They would come at night to see me and be with me.
Then, on November 9th and 10th, 1938, a defining moment occurred. They called it Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Soldiers, Nazi party members, and residents of Germany across the country burned 1,100 synagogues, destroyed more than 900 stores and shops, and vandalized homes. Mountains of shattered glass were left along the sidewalks and streets. Though publicly denounced by the government, the acts were left unpunished. Bigotry had at last turned into violence. The glass became a powerful symbol of shattered innocence and a warning of things to come.
So in the evening around 9 o'clock, the doorbell was ringing. My mother came with about 4 or 5 people from my hometown. I also come from a smaller town. And so they came, and of course everybody was crying. My mother said they threw stones in our house all day long.
So you saw synagogues burned?
Yeah.
Stones thrown in people's windows?
In our house at home all day long, the school children, the teacher came with the school children, and they threw stones upstairs in our house.
It's undescribable. I mean, it really is undescribable. There was glass all over, and you know that since I wasn't there at the time that it actually happened, you know that everything had been ripped out or taken out by people. There were piles of fire, I mean, piles of where there was a fire, that they burned books, and then they burned and glass all over. It really was crystal night, and the synagogue had burned down, and it was a terrible sight to see.
If any good were to come out of Kristallnacht, it was the warning it served for thousands of Jews to leave Germany for safer areas. Lottie's maiden name, Kohn, shows up all too often on this list of victims of the Holocaust.
I lost my mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. All gone.
Lottie left 2 years earlier. Selma Frank left shortly after Kristallnacht. She later learned of the deaths of her grandparents and a sister, who did not see the night for its true significance. Ethel's mother finally came to the conclusion her family's honorable service to the German government wasn't something she could rely on for security. She arranged passports and visas on the black market to send Ethel and her brother to Spain. Ethel then received 3 letters from her mother, the last of which was filled with optimism, hope, and ultimately a tragically misguided trust of the German government.
In October or the end of September, she wrote us and she says, "Isn't this wonderful? They just sent us a letter that we are going to be sent to this wonderful place where the bombs don't fall, and that we're going to be nice and safe, and that she will write us as soon as she gets there." And that was the last thing we heard from my mother. And till about 8 years ago, I wrote to the government in Hamburg, where I was born, and asked them some information, and they sent me this wonderful book. And in the book, it gives the name of 6,000 Jews that have been killed from this city alone. And on the first page was my mother's name, and she was sent to Lichtenstadt Lodge, and apparently was killed the same day as she got there, because they took widows and young people first.
As the war spread to France and concentration camps began springing up all over, Yolanda Luca's separation from her beloved mother was much more abrupt. She remembers hearing German soldiers knocking on her door.
One day on July 16, 1942, 3 German soldiers knocked on the door. I think there was a Frenchman with them too, and took my mother away and my brother. At that time, my father was over 60, and they didn't take anybody that was over 60, and they just left me there. They took him to a police station, and afterwards, they took him to a school where they gathered him in the yard. My brother was released. I don't know about what miracle. And they took everybody back from that school to the police station. My mother called me and she said, "Bring me some coffee." And I see all those people gathered at the police station. And I gave her the coffee and she said, "I'll never see my children again." She wrote me that she was working in the infirmary and that she needed food. So I made many trips there and took packages of food that we left at the door of the camp, and we could hear the Germans shoot once in a while, so we would bend down. And one day I didn't hear any more from my mother, so I went everywhere. Asked what happened. Went to the police station, they couldn't give me an answer. Went to the War Department, and finally one day I received a letter saying that after 5 years, she was declared deceased, and that's all.
They saw what few humans should ever see, the atrocities of war. Men against men. They left young and naive, and in 4 years of fighting marched toward the conclusion of World War II as hardened soldiers, brave and triumphant. They thought they had seen it all, until they found the camps.
Every U.S. soldier that was with me, myself included, were completely silenced. We couldn't even speak to each other because of the things that we've seen. And it took us a long time to get ourselves together, you know, after seeing all that. Even after I came home, it was hard to forget. When you walked they took you into a room where those facilities were, it was completely silent. Nobody didn't even breathe hard, I don't believe, to see the horror that had took place, you know.
Even seasoned veterans?
Even seasoned veterans. It's the difference between a soldier being killed or something and seeing this.
Well, I was a young man then, a little older than some. I was already a sergeant, and I was probably 23, I guess I was. I was a little bit older than most of them.
Warren Reed walked into Ohrdruf concentration camp in 1945 and immediately took these pictures.
My first glimpse of it was when we went in to Ohrdruf North. That's the one we released, the 89th Infantry Division, the one that showed you. And when we went through the gate into this camp, looking at the camp from outside, it looked like a college campus or something. Had avid walls and shrubbery around it. And when we went through the gate, the first thing that met our eyes was some 37 people that was laying in the yard, had been shot, executed while we were waiting to move in. And the ones that could walk, they had moved out. Well, when I first seen this, we were all in shock. We couldn't believe that they would execute people that couldn't walk, just shoot them lay on the ground there, the ones that had wounds or they were too sick to move. And as we moved on in then and come to the sheds that had the bodies stacked up in them, quicklime pits, of course it made us sick. And I guess my first reaction was we were in shock. Not only me, all of us were in shock. We just hadn't never. Death was something we'd seen as infantrymen, but that wasn't anything like what we seen.
When Warren Reed and his fellow officers reported what they had seen to General Eisenhower's headquarters, they were immediately ordered to freeze all evidence. They were also issued another order.
We were told that in the town there, that every man, woman, and child in that town, every German in that town, would be run through that camp and made look at it, because they were denying it. They didn't know what anything was going on or anything, which didn't make much sense. And I do know that the Burgermeister and his wife was made to go through that camp, and they went home that same evening and committed suicide.
The impact of what Warren Reed and his fellow soldiers saw that day was felt across Europe, and soon the world. Irvin Barnes, fighting with the Field Artillery Unit for less than a year, would also feel the impact of what Reed had just seen. Barnes and his fellow soldiers were just outside of Nordhausen when General Eisenhower issued the same command to his own soldiers as he did to the residents who lived near the camps.
We were sitting a little knoll there, and there's a railroad crossing. We couldn't see across it. But they came back to trucks and said, everybody out. I said, what do we got to get out for? And they said, the concentration camp right over that knoll. We had orders from General Eisenhower that every able-bodied American soldier in that vicinity would look at it to be an eyewitness to the Holocaust, because people didn't believe it. You walk in this little fenced-in area, railroad came by, and all you could see was just thousands of dead bodies all around the camp, sides of it, inside the camp. It's like, I don't know whether they died right where they died or where they stacked them there, what happened to them. They went into Nordhausen and got every able-bodied male civilian from 12, 15 on up that was able, and brought them out there and made them bury those people, pick them up with their bare hands. And over stances, I had to get up out of the wind and where I could watch it, you know. Terrible.
freedom. When it finally came time to open the gates and let these people go, the American soldiers and the camp survivors realized freedom, for the moment, meant no clear understanding of where they could go.
We opened the gates and everything, and what astonished us was that they would not leave. And we told them they were free to go, and these people were from Poland, Polish Jewish people. And they finally, after we broke down the language barrier, they told us that all the fighting was between where we were and their homeland, so they couldn't go, so they stayed there. We called for medical assistance to come up, gave them what food we had. Searching around Geldern, we found a cold storage vault, and we went back and got some of the women from the camp, took them down, and went in and draped them all with mink stoles and coats and everything, and they thought that we were the greatest things in the world, you know.
Be glad to see us. And some of them could speak enough English, because I remember talking to some of them, and first thing, a couple of them wanted a cigarette. And I gave 2 or 3 of them, man. And they lit that cigarette, man, and grinned and thanked me for it, and they were glad to get it.
And we opened the gates, and, you know, but what astonished us was they would not come out. And we kept explaining to them that you're free, you know, you can go, you know. But I guess they were the prisoners there was a little surprised too, you know. We seen some of the food that they ate was, they just had these big pots of like a green soup. It was really awful to even look at, let alone eat, you know. We gave them what food we had because we were traveling light, so we didn't have a lot. You know. Well, they had told us they had tried to experiment with X-rays. They were X-raying them, and they would leave them under X-rays for 10 or 15 minutes.
I think about the worst thing was we walked up at Nordhausen camp after we went up a little ridge, railroad crossing, in a wire fence, and just thousands of dead bodies there, like cordwood or something, just everywhere you could see. And that's hard to believe, even after you see it. Seeing the ovens and the gas, the shower rooms, and the storerooms where they kept their clothes, and they even had women's clothes and baby clothes in there, but I didn't see any sign of a woman in it or a baby in it. Evidently they'd been there because they had all those clothes, and they were saving them, shipping them wherever they wanted them, I guess.
The only thing I could say is I seen it. I don't have any documentation or anything in my hip pocket, you know. The only thing I can say is I seen it, and that's what concerns me after I'm dead. What's going to happen then, you know?
If there was ever a hell on earth, this was it. Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. The camps. They were designed to efficiently slaughter as many humans as possible. Gypsies, homosexuals, political opponents, Jews. In 1942, Adolf Hitler and his closest advisors came upon a final solution to the Jewish question. The question, what to do with what they believed was this inferior devil race. The solution, exterminate every last one of them. They nearly succeeded. 6 million Jews killed, millions of others considered not worthy of being part of the Aryan race, also wiped out. And you didn't have to be Jewish, only an opponent, like Adele Reed.
I was raised as a Catholic. We wasn't allowed to go to church and nothing anymore. And then we had to work in the steelworks, you know. And I had a good girlfriend. And we told jokes, and I didn't like the way Hitler did everything. So I spoke out, and the girl turned mean. So one minute when I came to work, the Gestapo was there and picked me up.
For casually criticizing the leader of her country, Adele Reed was arrested and taken on a train to the Ravensbrück camp near Berlin.
they took us to the train station. They put chains on our leg and on our arms, you know. And so we had to walk from the police station to the train station. And how much you would say from the police station to the train station? 5 miles?
Yeah, something like
Or
that.
5 some miles, you know. And then they put us on the train, and we couldn't go to the bathroom and nothing.
In fact, the boxcars that were used to transport Adele and millions of Jews to the camps were oftentimes killing machines in themselves. More than 100 people would be crammed into a single boxcar that was big enough to comfortably hold 25. They traveled for hours and days on end. Many died of heat exhaustion in the summer, hypothermia in the winter, or suffocation from lack of air and the stench of human waste.
Called up all the Jews to assembly in one place. They didn't tell us where we're going. They told us they're going to move us to the east, to the west, somewhere. But we didn't know about Auschwitz at all. We didn't know about concentration camps. We didn't know about nothing. And we arrived in Auschwitz the first week in November, middle of the night. At the, and all hell came out. SS was staying on the ramp, had to get out. Men on one side, women on the other side, and they started selection.
What was the selection?
The officer in charge, and she select people to work, and the rest is the crematorium.
Did the people who were selected to die know
Yes.
that was the case?
No, they did not.
What happened there?
Well, I don't know. They didn't know. They didn't know. They didn't know where they're going. Because everything was so fast. They push your ass so fast you wouldn't have think nothing. They didn't let you think about it.
What did they base their selection on?
How many people they need to in camp? Because some transport, they didn't need nothing to send the whole transport to crematorium.
Upon arrival, prisoners' hair, clothing, glasses, dentures, and gold fillings were taken from them. Years later, Allied soldiers found huge warehouses filled with these possessions. In the Nazi custom, they produced no waste. The products would be sold or melted down into more useful materials.
And be relatively safe.
One of the first experiences Maurice Levis ever remembered was being taken from his home in
1943
Athens,
when,
Greece, late in the war.
The Germans.
Before he was 10, he had witnessed slavery, starvation, and death.
I was in Bergen-Belsen for a year. I saw a lot of people die from starvation, but we did see the labor gangs, and we saw people, just large columns of people walking by and people falling and dying. Every day. That was a very commonplace. They were just exhausted. And we ourselves were fairly well starved. I can remember being hungry for a year, if you can ever imagine that. That was, and a lot of people died from malnutrition. See, the thing there was that if you got sick, you were dead.
Not only was life in the camps a living hell, it did indeed seem to last an eternity. For Irving Althaus, that meant 3 years in Auschwitz. He lived on 1 slice of bread and some water a day. Yet Irving says he was lucky. He was a skilled electrician and therefore useful. He got to work inside. Others weren't so fortunate.
He got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and a roll call. And a lot of people had to work outside, construction, everything. They used to get beaten all the time. Because I was lucky I didn't get beaten all. A lot of my friends died for it. A lot of people got beaten to death.
Just random beatings?
Yeah. A lot of people just, they wanted to die. They couldn't take it no more. They just give up.
While beatings occurred frequently, the real goal was mass extermination. The Nazis concluded early on that they could squeeze hundreds of Jews into showers and kill them almost instantly with Zyklon B gas pellets that were dropped into the ventilation system. This sculpture, created for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum by Mieczysław Stowiecki, depicts the quick and efficient process by which Nazis exterminated Jews. New prisoners were marched into a chamber where they were stripped of their clothing. Joseph Kramer, who worked dutifully at several concentration camps, including Auschwitz, described the process of injecting the deadly gas Zyklon B into the chamber this way. He says, "I introduced a certain amount of salt, instilled to the upper right of the peephole. I then closed the opening of the tube with a cork attached to the end of the tube. This cork had a metal pipe. This pipe injected the salt and water toward the opening in the chamber. I saw that these women breathed for about half a minute before they fell to the ground. After I had turned on the ventilation inside the flue, I opened the doors. I found the women lying lifeless on the floor, and they were covered all over with excrement." Kramer and others led the victims to believe they were simply going to take a refreshing shower. To continue this efficient process, the bodies were then taken right down the hall to the crematorium, placed in huge ovens, and cremated.
They could gas 2,000 people at one time in the big crematorium, in the chamber. They pushed them in, they had to undress, push them in, they throw in the Zyklon B gas, close the door, and they were gassed. And when they opened the gate, the body was all blood, and come out from the nose and the ears and everything. It was just like awful, awful. And then they pushed them into the ovens. But the one time, when the Hungarian transport came in, they couldn't burn 2,000 people at one time, so they used to burn them outside. And it was awful, the smell, and I had to fix the fence behind the crematorium. And they were burning right in a big pit, the bodies, the smell and the smoke. I couldn't finish the job. I just took off, and my boss called me. He said, "Where you going?" I said, "I'm going back to the shop." He said, "Why?" I said, "Boss, I just can't finish the job. I can't see nothing. The smoke, it's choking me."
And oftentimes, perhaps thousands of times, the last sympathetic face these men, women, and children saw was that of Irving Althaus.
I was walking back from the crematorium. That was 1944. They were bringing the Hungarian Jews there. And they were transporting day and night. In a truck with children and women passed by on the gate, open, the back gate open. A few children fell out and the women fell out. The truck stopped. And the officer, I was right there, and the officer asked me to give my hand, to put him back on the truck. And they asked me, the women knew. They asked me if they're going to death, and I didn't say nothing. I just couldn't say nothing. I just didn't answer at all. But they had a feeling, and they asked me in Jewish if they go to death, and I just couldn't say nothing. And they went because you could see it right there. It was a few hundred feet. And that's always sticks in my mind. But sometimes you just couldn't say. I couldn't say nothing. I was just dumb.
The war raged on. Thousands of Jews were rounded up and taken to their deaths each day. As the Nazis began to expend much of their valuable war material on too many fronts, cracks started to appear in their once invincible shield. Working in a slave labor camp, Frank Schatz made an agonizing decision.
But through the grapevine, I learned that very soon we will be sent to Auschwitz. So I had to make a choice if I want to die Auschwitz or escape and take my chances. But I didn't have money, I didn't have identification. What I had was a few civilian clothing what the Romanian peasant gave me. So I escaped, and I was one day wandering the streets of Budapest like a hunted animal. I didn't know, I just was looking for shelter, and I have no idea how I will survive. And the most amazing thing happened. On the street, I ran into, but literally into the arms of a childhood friend of mine from my hometown. He was already in the underground.
Frank joined a Zionist-led anti-Nazi underground and began his own quest of saving lives, much like his hero, Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg. Wallenberg set up safe houses all over Budapest, including the house where Frank stayed soon after his escape. But safety wasn't a feeling that lasted long for a young Jewish man on the loose, trying to falsify the stated age on his identification papers.
And so I was directed to go and ask help from a lab technician who was employed by a private sanatorium in Budapest. So I went to see her, but you never knew that a new person isn't an informer who will denounce you and it will be the end of you. So anyway, but I didn't have a choice, and I went to see her. I gave her my papers. She took it in the lab, and a few minutes later reported back that she lifted out the old one, but I will have to wait maybe 30, 45 minutes till the spot will dry, that we can inscribe the new one. And we were chatting there, talking, and she told me that the sanatorium was really a hiding place for Hungarian Jews, that all the patients were Jewish, the doctors, the nurses, except some of the service people who were bribed to keep silent. So we were chatting, and suddenly I have something told me I should not wait longer. So I told her I would like to have the papers back and I will inscribe it later. I just wanted to leave. I left the place, and I was maybe 2 blocks away when I heard screeching brakes. I turned back and I see the 2 truckloads of Hungarian fascist militia led by a man dressed in monk suit with drawn guns. I jumped out and went into the sanatorium. So of course I didn't want to go back. I started to walk away, and only next day I learned what happened in the sanatorium. The fascist militia massacred everybody, all the patients in their bed, the doctors, nurses. Of course, maybe some of the service staff was the one who denounced or informed them, and so they were safe, but otherwise everybody was killed. So I really escaped by a hairline.
While Frank Schatz was miraculously escaping death, Adele Reed was now in Ravensbrück, watching death pass before her in murder after murder.
Well, I tell you, it was mean. You know, we had to work hard, and like I say, when they had the cemetery, the crematory going on, we had to take the clothes out of the gas chamber and everything. I saw them going to the gas chamber, okay? Because it had a really big sign out there, shower, you know? And the first few weeks, I really didn't know what was going on, because I thought they really went to the shower and we didn't saw them coming out, you know. But it was quite a while later that we had to do this job. In February of 1945, the whole, you can say a whole bunch of women came in, you know. They just came to the gate, and I knew then they went to the gas chamber. And when I see them coming in and go, you know, it's still, I mean, everything still upsets me.
I would say children are not truly able to face death. I mean, to us, the death did not have any reality. Even other people's death, I think for children, it was hard to grasp the essence of dying. And in many ways, we were completely fearless in the sense that people that were older or had
our parents were very fearful because they knew what was happening and they knew what the risks were. But for children, you couldn't explain to a child that they could be killed anytime.
Efficient as they were, the concentration camps weren't killing all of Europe's Jews. Soldiers, fascist mobs, the Gestapo, the SS, all sought out Jews to kill or take to the camps. In many cases, it took an almost superhuman effort to stay alive.
Took them down to the Danube River. Now, don't forget it was in December when the Danube is almost frozen, but it's not frozen, it's just floating ice. They had to stand by the embankment, they had to strip, and after they shot them and they fall into the water, and the Danube River took care of the rest. Now this friend of mine, particular girl, she was an excellent swimmer. So before they had a chance to shoot her, she fell into the water, started to swim under the surface. Finally, when she couldn't, the Danube has a very swift current, so it took her far away. When she couldn't stand anymore the cold, she crawled out and went to the first apartment house, rang the bell, and usually the superintendent on those houses, they were locked at night always. Was a police informer, everybody knew it, but she didn't have a choice, so she rang the bell, she blurted out her story and told him, asked for help, and said, if you will help me, you will get rich rewards. The man hesitated, but finally let her in, kept her during the. She gave my name, address, that he should come and bring new clothing, new identification papers, and reward him. So it is what happened. She was saved. She lives now in Israel, have a son, and is a happy person, alive happy person. Our main purpose was to save lives, to save the Jews who were in hiding or were running away, to furnish them with false papers, to give them money, to give them shelter, to take them to protected houses. It was all a game for time, because we knew that if we can postpone to having them taken by transport to Auschwitz, they will be saved. The Russians were already closing in, but Eichmann was determined to take as many Jews as he can. So what we did was really to save people.
Were you also constantly aware of that these were people, these were compatriots, these were Jews who were
sure.
What was going through your mind?
Well, I knew sooner or later they're going to do to me the same thing. We had no hope to get released, never.
You were sure that you were going to be?
Yes, yes, yes. We knew sooner or later they'd come after us. So, but we were ready for that. But we had to live day by day, that's all. You got to fight every day.
How did you wake up in the morning and just get on with the day?
Wake up in the morning, the first thing was what we go eat. That's the main thing. That was the main thing. How can we survive today? Not tomorrow, but today. What I'm going to do today.
These Jews were a people separated, confused, weak from hunger, and consumed with fear. And any effort at resistance was met decisively by the Nazis.
You couldn't resist. It's pointless. Because, take an example of our group. If I went out working with 10 people, if somebody escaped, not only they hanged me too, but they bring his family from the outside and lay him out so everybody can see his grandmother and grandfather, his uncles and everything. So resistance was very, very, very out of the question. But they emptied the camp. was a family camp. They kept him there for two months or so. And then they guessed the whole transport. When I walked in next day to the camp, to the section, it was empty. You could see shoes laying there, children's shoes and everything. And I was really depressed. And the officer walks by to me, say, next, you be next, to me like this. So I told him, I say, but when I go have company with me. He didn't say nothing. He knew what I meant.
Many inmates lost their sanity. They couldn't cope with the fear and destruction. Others looked deeply toward their faith in God. They tried everything they could to cope.
Throughout her stay in Ravensbrück, Adele Reed vowed to marry one of Hitler's conquerors. She did. She married Warren, a camp survivor and a first-hand witness. Out of great hatred, a lifelong love affair blossomed.
It feels good. And if I may say so, and it feels good to be American. You don't know how good we have it.
By now, one question that must be running through your mind is how? How could one group of human beings inflict such cruelty on another, simply based on religious beliefs and culture? While the Nazi Holocaust of the Jews is a dominant example of such atrocities, they have, in reality, been happening for generations. What's unusual about this instance is that the Germans were, at the time of World War II, a sophisticated, cultured people. On the campus of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Professor Roger Smith has been asking the same kinds of questions in his role as Professor of Genocidal Studies. His first thoughts may strike home to many of us.
Someone wrote that the road to Auschwitz was paved by hate, but it was made possible by indifference. Bystanders can exercise considerable effect. Early on, the longer the events go on, the closer they get to actual mass violence in some, the less they can do in some. But when you see your neighbor being taken away, you may not know they're being sent to their death, but you know something terrible is happening, that something is going wrong in that society and so on. What do? Do you protest and so on? You look the other way.
In the Williamsburg Synagogue she and her late husband founded in 1958 with 5 other families, Ethel Sternberg poses these questions to young students and ultimately to herself.
You don't get politically involved and you let everybody talk you into something. It can happen so easily that it was something that I needed strongly to tell kids. And when I talk to kids in school and they look at me and they can't explain, and he says, "Why did you do it?" And I said, "I don't really know why." And it's really funny because I think I watch every movie that has something to do with Hitler or anything, because I'm trying to find something, just one little thing, why he did this. And the only reason, and I told the kids, and they were all sitting looking at me, and I said, "You just imagine if all the blue eyes blonde kids are on this side and all the dark eyes and dark one on that kid, and the guy comes in and says, 'I don't like those blonde kids. I want to get rid of all those blonde kids. And I just want to live with these dark-headed kids.'" And that's all there was to it. I mean, what other reason would it have been? It's just mind-boggling.
The Democrats and President Clinton have no choice but to...
Meaningful political and sociological discussion constitute the very essence of our American freedom. Interest in the political process, voting, and supporting candidates and their parties have kept this democracy alive for more than 2 centuries. In fact, communication and education open the windows of knowledge, and if this knowledge is based on fact, it can ultimately lead to enlightenment, tolerance, and peace.
Well, because these kind of things have a tendency to happen over and over. Destroying peoples, ravishing countries, uprooting cultures, blotting out languages, like happened with the Yiddish language and culture. And we have to always be on our alert. So to do whatever we can as individuals and as a country to prevent that from happening again.
In Germany, there were several factors that made the Holocaust possible. First was a social climate of anger and resentment toward Jews. They were blamed for much of the economic plight Germany suffered after World War I. Germany was also a culture of obedience. Germans were always willing to follow the law to the letter. And as one Nazi put it, you kill one Jew, it becomes easier to kill 10. You kill 10, it becomes easier to kill 100. Ironically, many of these people who killed Jewish children considered themselves to be loving parents.
But they don't seem to have that imaginative capacity to identify, to think what they're doing. And I think that can also contribute. Now, the fact is that while a lot of people would like to think that people who commit these terrible acts we use several words, they're mad, they aren't mad, they're bestial, they're not animals, they're human beings, and only we commit genocide. That they are primitive, and these are people who came from high European cultures, and many of them had degrees in law, medicine, and other kinds of things, and so we like to think that that's why they do it. And that's partly because it distances from ourselves. We're not mad, we're not bestial, we're not primitive, therefore we never do those things, and so. But in fact, ordinary people placed in a set of extraordinary circumstances can learn to do these things.
Nicole Yancey, however, will tell you of a different kind of people. A family in France who risked their lives to take in Nicole and her sister and not only protected them from the Nazis at great peril, but raised them as their own children. Two small children whose only benefit to the adoptive family was the return of love.
They would have been killed for doing what they did. They accepted to take two little girls in the middle of the night, a little girl that they never met, and they took care of them. They hid them when they not hid, but hid them when they had to. And yes, they take great risks. Their life was in danger at all times. They never thought about it. For them, it was the only thing to do, the right and only thing to do.
Indeed, as much as we talk of right and wrong in these times, how many of us would have made the ultimate moral decision?
They were the most moral person I have known. They didn't do it for recognition, they didn't do it for decoration, they did it because it was the right and only thing to do. Because unconditionally they believe in the human nature, they believe in life. If you believe in life, not only yours, but if you believe in life, then you will do the right thing.
Many of the people in Denmark did the right thing, hiding Jews from the Nazis after it was announced that all Jews were to be deported to concentration camps. The famous diary of Anne Frank details how the young girl and her family were kept hidden from the Nazis under great risk, and eventually suffered for their bravery. And the story of Oskar Schindler, a Nazi Party member and businessman who saved more than 1,000 Jews by skillfully deceiving the Nazis, is now, of course, legendary.
And almost all of the Jews in Denmark were spirited out to Sweden in little boats and this sort of thing and so on. It was a community affair, a cross-section of the population. It was really extraordinary and so on.
One of the examples is that the police commissioner during the occupation, German occupation, issued identity cards to Jewish families that represented them as Christian. In most countries in Europe, in those days, your religion was listed on your identity card papers. So, you know, it was easy if a German was looking for Jews to just look at identity cards, and it says there that you were Jewish. So that was a help. Then there was a bishop on an island, Greek island, that when the Germans went there and demanded that he take the Jewish community and deliver it to them, he said that he would be the first one to to present himself before anybody else was presented, and that population, the Greek population, you know, stood out to the Germans, just like in Denmark. It happened there too. And all the Jews that lived in that community were never disturbed.
When the war finally ended and the doors of ovens, barbed wire gates, and boxcars finally began to open, citizens of the world began looking within themselves, within their own cultures and governments. To this day, we ask ourselves perhaps some of the most frightening questions a world society must answer. Can it happen again? How can we prevent a Holocaust from happening in our own society? Are we already on the way? Frank Schatz isn't waiting for answers. Schatz and his wife Yaroslava helped to fund the Reeves Center for International Studies on the campus of William and Mary. Schatz believes that international relations, humanistic endeavors, and the opportunity for others to bear witness to historical events will help to prevent an American Holocaust.
Nothing is more dangerous than half-educated or uneducated people. Educated people, and especially who just don't have an engineering degree but have a humanistic knowledge, are the one who really hold the future in their hand. And we felt very strongly, we ourselves endowed this center. We feel very strongly about it, that the young generation who will become the leaders are the one who should know and who should be supported. First of all, America has a long tradition of democracy and tolerance. It's an absolutely different country than Germany ever was. There is no guarantee that it cannot happen anywhere. It can, human nature, what it is, it can happen. But there are so many safeguards built into the American democracy, the Constitution alone, that I don't think those are fringe groups who has very little influence.
Others aren't so confident. Groups promoting hatred and intolerance have sprung up across the country in the last generation. Their acts of vandalism and isolated violent incidents may have a fringe feel to them, as Schatz says. But so did Hitler's young Nazis in the 1920s. And across the Atlantic, the term ethnic cleansing has surfaced as a reminder that history can tragically repeat itself.
Yes, absolutely. Because the human nature is very weak. Because it's easier to close your eyes and to have the law of silence. It's easier to say, it doesn't bother me, personally. It's easier to say, it's none of my business. It's easier to say, that's not my problem. Of course it's not, it's nobody's problem, but it is everybody's problem. So yes, I think it can happen any day. I think it's happening.
And then I wondered what would happen after my generation is gone, and the people that say it didn't happen. And we'll be gone, and there'll be nobody there to prove that, you know, what really did happen. At the time that we were going through all this, we said we would be back over there in 20 years. The only thing that's going to prevent it is this, people getting the horrors and the stories out and everything. Maybe that will prevent it. If steps isn't taken, I'm afraid that it may happen.
In fact, there are still people across the world who claim this Holocaust never happened, despite the evidence, despite the tattoos, despite the meticulously corroborated stories of living witnesses.
Even people that should know better, they're spouting it, they don't believe it. I had some people around here talk to me. They said, they don't believe it happened. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't see how it could have, anything like that could have happened. I said, well, it happened. They don't believe any human race could do that to another human race. I said, well, it happened over there. They had more than one camp.
Hate. When you read or you see pictures in the newspaper where skinheads marked the home of a Jewish family with menorahs in the window. Why? It's possible. Well, there's enough literature, there's enough movies and television plays to know it happened. Believe me, it happened. I am here. I'm an only child. Parents wouldn't send an only child away from home, would they?
Having seen how it started and how insidious it was, it definitely can happen again in an atmosphere of intimidation. If you have a state that that would officially, for example, brand you, or let's say whatever minority group is involved would brand you as a as somebody that is undesirable or somehow need to get rid of you, just like it happened in Europe. There are certain signs that that you can pick up. You have to be very sensitive of intolerance, and you have to really fight it at a very early stage. That's why when I see political intolerance anywhere, I feel that it should be attacked immediately and without any compromise.
It is perhaps ironic that in his effort to annihilate the Jewish people, Adolf Hitler may have given them more strength, faith, freedom, and universal respect than they have ever experienced. And the culture this dictator and his henchmen tried to wipe off the face of the earth is the same one that brought us the Old Testament, a culture based on the traditions of one God, a culture that existed before Christ and inspired generations with the tales of Abraham, Moses, and Noah, just to name a few. And Hitler has given the surviving generations a lifelong mission. Aviva Mrazek is the child of parents who were spared when the war ended just before they were to be taken to Auschwitz.
Talk to your generation and my generation and the generation after you. Tell them, if you would, what they need to do to not allow it to happen again.
Well, they need to look into their hearts first. They need to start with themselves. It's very difficult to control what other people may do and how other people may view society and its ills, but you can start with yourself. And the kindest and bravest thing that a person can do, I think, is really identify where they stand on any issue and how they feel about things and how are they teaching their children, what are they teaching their children. If we teach hate, we will foster hate. If we teach love and understanding, then that's what we will nurture.
And what lessons can be learned from these brave souls who not only survived the torture, humiliation, and loss of family, but picked up the pieces of their lives and moved on?
Utter amazement and wonder, and a thrill that in spite of the bestiality that these people experience, they still believe in God, His goodness, and His love. And I think that's shows the power of faith. There's no question that their faith helped them survive the very difficult days and nights that they lived through, the terror of those many years. And it should show us, as people who live in relative comfort, and often people are faithless today, that faith has great power to enrich one's life. So I'm utterly amazed at their maintaining their faith, and admire them greatly for it. And I also see the practical value of holding on.
What is your opinion of living in a country like the United States?
Oh, fine. Oh, that's the greatest country. Freedom, everything. I enjoy it. I have no problem whatsoever. I get along with everybody here. Jews, not Jews, and everybody. I never have any problem.
You seem like you are not a bitter man for what you went through. You seem like you're a very positive man.
No, I'm not bitter.
and you didn't defeat us. And you know, for all the many years that us Jews have been surviving, or not only the Holocaust but other things, we still are on top of it, thank God.
The best and the worst of the human condition. Because we are all children of the same human family, it is our responsibility, indeed your responsibility, to see that the pages of history are never tainted like this again. We may share the guilt, but more importantly, we must share the light. The pages of history turn every day, and in this light, your light, the words from the book of Deuteronomy, carved in the walls of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, have never rung with such meaning.
Guard your soul carefully, lest you forget the things your eyes saw, and you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children.